30 years of driving other people's children to school, and the thing that breaks you isn't the morning your wife dies while you're already on the road. It's not the funeral. It's not even the empty side of the bed that stays cold for 1,000 nights straight. It's a Sunday afternoon at a restaurant you didn't pick, surrounded by 14 people who share your last name, hearing your own daughter call you a burden, and realizing that the bread roll in your hand is the only thing at that table that hasn't turned against you. My name is Gerald Mack. I'm 67 years old, and this is the story of how I disappeared. Welcome back to Silent Fortune Stories. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, every satisfying story ending starts with an underestimated beginning. If you're new here, we tell real, raw stories about family, justice, and the quiet strength people carry when no one's watching. Subscribe so you never miss a story. My full name is Gerald Allen Mack. Born August 14, 1956, in a cinder-block house on the south side of Clarksville, Tennessee, to a father who laid asphalt and a mother who pressed uniforms at Fort Campbell. I was the second of 4 boys, the quiet one, the one who didn't need calling twice for supper and didn't need asking twice to help. That quietness never left me. Some people mistake it for weakness. Some mistake it for emptiness. It's neither. It's just how I was built. I started driving a school bus for the Clarksville-Montgomery County school system when I was 36 years old, the same year my daughter Patricia turned 9 and my youngest, Derek, turned 4. Before that, I'd worked loading docks, overnight security, and a 2-year stint at an auto parts warehouse that paid just enough to remind me it wasn't enough. The bus route, Route 27, Sango to Rossview, changed everything. Steady hours, benefits, a pension building in the background like a slow, patient promise. It wasn't glamorous. The seat had a tear in the vinyl that maintenance never fixed, and every February the heater smelled like burning rubber. But it was mine. I drove that route for 30 years. 30 years of the same left turn onto Trenton Road at 6:14 in the morning. 30 years of watching kindergartners become high school seniors and then, sometimes, watching their own children climb the same 3 steps. 30 years of a steel-toed boot on a brake pedal and a wave to Mrs. Delacroix at the crosswalk on Madison Street. I wore the same brand of boots the entire time, Wolverine DuraShocks size 11, because when something works, I don't see a reason to change it. Donna, my wife, understood that about me. She was the loud to my quiet, the color to my gray. She was a home health aide who could walk into a dying person's house and somehow make them laugh before lunch. We met at a church fish fry in 1984, married in 1985, and bought a small 2-bedroom house on Birchwood Lane in 1994 with a mortgage that felt like a mountain. We paid that mortgage off together over 22 years, making double payments when we could, skipping vacations when we couldn't, eating rice and chicken on Fridays so the extra $40 could go toward principal. I paid for Patricia's braces, her prom dress, her first car, a used Honda Civic with a dented fender that I fixed myself in the driveway. I paid for Derek's 2 years of community college on a bus driver's salary, which meant I didn't replace the water heater the winter it broke. We boiled water on the stove for 3 months. Donna and I never told the kids about that. We just did it. Paid for everything. Said nothing. That was the deal I made with myself. Not because anyone asked me to. Because that's what fathers do. Or at least that's what I believed fathers did. I didn't know it yet, but silence can be mistaken for absence. And absence, in a family that stopped paying attention, can be mistaken for irrelevance. The first sign came 6 days after Donna's funeral. It was a Wednesday. I'd come home from the bus depot. I went back to work the Monday after we buried her because the house was too quiet and the route was the only rhythm I still recognized, and found Craig, Patricia's husband, standing in the living room measuring the doorway with a tape measure. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Just seeing if that recliner would fit through," he said, casual, like he was measuring for curtains. Donna's body had been in the ground less than a week, and my son-in-law was measuring furniture. I should have looked closer, but I was still wearing the fog of grief like a coat I couldn't take off. I told him it was too early to move anything. He nodded. He didn't put the tape measure away. He just slid it into his back pocket like a promise he'd be back. That should have told me everything. The second sign came at Thanksgiving that same year. First Thanksgiving without Donna. I'd made a turkey, overcooked, dry, not even close to Donna's, and set the table for 8. Patricia arrived 40 minutes late with Craig and their 2 girls, carrying a store-bought pie and an energy I couldn't name at the time but now recognize as impatience. Derek came alone, earbuds still half in, barely looking up from his phone. We sat. We ate. Nobody mentioned Donna. Not once. Not her name. Not her chair, which I'd set a place for out of habit and then quietly removed before anyone arrived because I didn't want to make them uncomfortable. I swallowed that, filed it away. After dinner, Patricia pulled me aside in the kitchen and said, "Dad, have you thought about what you're going to do with the house?" "I'm going to live in it," I said. She looked at Craig. Craig folded his arms. That arm fold, I'd see it 100 more times over the next 3 years. Arms folded, chin slightly down, like a man guarding something he thought was his. "It's a lot of house for one person," Patricia said. "It's my house," I said. She didn't argue. She just smiled the way people smile when they've already had a conversation you weren't invited to. Looking back, that smile was a blueprint. The third sign was smaller, and maybe that's why it cut deeper. Derek's 26th birthday. I drove 40 minutes to his apartment in Nashville after a full shift on the route. Brought him a card with $200 in it. Cash I'd pulled from the small savings account Donna and I had kept at First Horizon Bank. When he opened the card, he glanced at the bills, said, "Thanks, Pop," and set it on the counter next to an unopened energy drink. No hug. No eye contact. Just the flat, dutiful tone of a man checking a box. I stayed for 20 minutes. He spent 14 of them on his phone. On the drive home, I passed the Birchwood Lane exit and kept driving for another mile before I realized I'd missed my turn. My hands were on the wheel, same as every day, but something in me had shifted. It wasn't anger yet. It was something quieter. A question I didn't want to answer. Am I still here? I would come to understand later that the people who are supposed to see you are the ones most capable of making you disappear. The Sunday it happened, I almost didn't go. Derek had called me the Tuesday before. A rare phone call, not a text, and told me he'd put together a dinner for my birthday. My actual birthday had been 3 weeks earlier, and I'd spent it alone eating a ham sandwich and watching a documentary about bridge construction on PBS. Nobody had called. Not Patricia. Not Derek. Not a single one of the grandchildren. I turned 67 in a quiet kitchen with a refrigerator hum for company. So when Derek said, "We're doing something for you, Pop, Sunday at 5, Hargrove's Grill downtown," I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Hope. Foolish, paper-thin hope. I ironed a shirt. Put on a tie Donna had bought me for our 30th anniversary. Navy blue with a small silver pattern, she said, made me look like a senator. I drove downtown in my 2009 Ford Ranger, parked 2 blocks away because the lot was full, and walked into Hargrove's Grill at 4:55. It was the nicest restaurant I'd been to in years. White tablecloths, cloth napkins, candles on the tables. The kind of place where the menu doesn't have pictures and the water comes in a glass bottle. I didn't know who was paying, but I had a feeling it wasn't going to be cheap, and I had a quiet, proud thought that maybe they wanted to do something special for me. 14 people were already seated at a long table near the back. 14. Patricia and Craig on one side, their 2 teenage daughters beside them. Derek at the far end with his girlfriend, whose name I'd been told once and forgotten. My sister-in-law Ruthie, who had been Donna's closest friend. 2 of Patricia's friends from her HOA board. Craig's brother, Nolan, a cousin I hadn't seen in 4 years. And 3 others I recognized from various family events but couldn't name with certainty. I sat down at the head of the table. Someone had placed a small card that said Gerald in front of the plate. Not Dad. Not Pop. Gerald. Like I was a guest at someone else's party. The first 20 minutes were fine. Bread was brought. Water was poured. I ordered the roast chicken because it was the least expensive entree and I didn't want to be a bother. I didn't know it yet, but the menu would become irrelevant. Patricia stood up when the appetizers arrived. She had a glass of wine in her hand, white, nearly full, and she tapped it once with a butter knife, the way people do at weddings when they want everyone to listen. The table went quiet. I looked up from the bread roll in my hand. I hadn't taken a bite of it yet. I was still holding it, warm against my palm, when my daughter cleared her throat and said, "We should probably talk about Dad's situation." The room tilted. She said it clearly, practiced, like she'd rehearsed it in the car. Not slurred, not emotional, measured. 14 people at that table, and every one of them heard it. I looked at Craig, arms folded, chin down. I looked at Derek, my youngest, the boy I'd put through 2 years of community college on a bus driver's salary. The boy I'd taught to tie his shoes in the driveway of the Birchwood Lane house, kneeling on concrete that hurt my knees even then. Derek was looking down at his phone, not texting, not scrolling, just staring at the dark screen like it was a door he could walk through and leave. That silence cost him more than he knows. 14 people at that table. Not one of them said a word. Not one. Ruthie, Donna's sister, pressed her napkin to her lips and looked at the tablecloth. Nolan studied his water glass. The 2 teenage granddaughters exchanged a glance that might have been discomfort, might have been boredom. Patricia's HOA friends sat perfectly still, the way people sit when they know they're witnessing something ugly and don't want any of it on their clothes. I set the bread roll down on the plate. Gently. Didn't throw it. Didn't squeeze it. Just set it down the way I set things down, carefully, without fuss. Patricia continued. She talked about next steps. She talked about transition planning. She used phrases like dignified arrangement and shared responsibility. Words that sounded reasonable from the outside but meant something very specific. They wanted me out of the Birchwood Lane property. They wanted to control my finances, and they had already, I would later learn, consulted an attorney about having me declared financially dependent. I didn't say anything. I sat there with my hands in my lap, feeling the navy tie against my chest, and I let her finish. When she sat down, someone, I think it was Craig, said, "It's for the best, Gerald." Gerald. Not Dad. Not Pop Gerald. I looked around that table one more time. 14 faces. Some guilty. Some indifferent. None brave. Then I stood up, buttoned my jacket, pushed in my chair, and walked out of Hargrove's Grill without saying a single word. The bread roll was still on the plate. I never did take a bite. I sat in my Ford Ranger for 11 minutes in that downtown parking spot. I know it was 11 minutes because the dashboard clock read 5:47 when I closed the door and 5:58 when I turned the key. The engine hummed. The tie felt tight, so I loosened it. Donna esse tie. Navy blue with the silver pattern. She'd straightened it for me before our anniversary dinner in 2014, standing in the hallway mirror, her hands steady, her eyes soft, saying, "You look like someone important, Gerald." I'd laughed and said, "I drive a bus." And she'd said, "You drive the same bus every day for people who depend on you, and you've never once been late. That's more important than anything." She was right. She was always right about the things that mattered. I pulled my phone out of my jacket pocket. It was an old Samsung. Not a smartphone, just a basic flip phone with large buttons that I kept charged more out of habit than necessity. I had 3 numbers saved that weren't family. My supervisor at the depot, my barber, and a man named Martin Embry. Martin Embry was a real estate attorney in Clarksville. Donna and I had hired him 9 years ago, 2014, the same year she fixed my tie, to help us with something nobody in the family knew about. Something quiet. Something that had been growing like a tree nobody thought to look at because it was planted in a yard they'd already dismissed. I opened the phone, scrolled to Martin's name, pressed call. It rang 4 times. Then his voicemail picked up, the same dry, professional recording he'd had for years. "Martin, this is Gerald Mack. I need to see you Monday morning. I'm bringing the lockbox. It's time." I closed the phone, set it on the passenger seat. In the rearview mirror, I could see the front door of Hargrove's Grill, still lit up, still open. Nobody had come out after me. Nobody had called. Nobody had texted. I didn't know it yet, but that would be the last time I would look at that restaurant. The last time I would sit in a parking space waiting for someone in my family to come through a door. There was a steel lockbox in the back of my bus depot locker. Combination lock. For digits, the month and year of our wedding, 0385. Inside that lockbox were documents that my children had never seen. Documents that would explain why I never complained, never asked for credit, and never once told them what Donna and I had been doing with the Birchwood Lane property for the last decade. On Monday, I would bring those documents to Martin Embry's office, and on Tuesday I would vanish. I pulled out of the parking spot, turned left onto Franklin Street, and drove home to Birchwood Lane in the dark. The bread roll was still on a plate at Hargrove's Grill, and 14 people were still sitting at a table, talking about my situation, as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a man to be loved. Something in me was done. Not broken. Done. There's a difference. Broken means you can't go on. Done means you choose not to. If you've made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. Monday morning. Martin Embry's office was on the second floor of a brick building on Commerce Street, above a dry cleaner's that had been there since before I started driving. I carried the lockbox in a canvas grocery bag because I didn't own a briefcase and never felt the need for one. Martin was 61, thin, with reading glasses he kept on a chain around his neck. He'd been our attorney since the beginning of the project, 9 years, and he was the only person alive, besides me, who understood the full picture. I set the lockbox on his desk, dialed the combination 0-3-8-5 and opened it. Inside were 11 documents. The first was the original deed to the Birchwood Lane property, 2 acres and a house that Donna and I had paid off over 22 years of double payments and boiled water winters. The second was a rezoning approval from the Montgomery County Planning Commission, dated 2015. That was the year Donna noticed that 2 new subdivisions were being built within a mile of our property and said, "Gerald, that land behind the house, do you know what that means?" I didn't. She did. She always saw what was coming before I did. The 3rd through 7th documents were lease agreements. Starting in 2016, Donna and I had leased portions of the property, the back acre and a half, to a commercial development company called Sycamore Ridge Partners. The land sat adjacent to a new interchange off I-24 that the state had announced in 2014. Donna had read about it in the Leaf Chronicle before anyone in the family had bothered to look up from their phones. The 8th document was a royalty agreement. Sycamore Ridge had built a small strip retail complex on the leased land, and Donna and I received quarterly payments based on tenant revenue. By 2019, the year Donna died, those payments had grown to over $11,000 a quarter. I hadn't touched a penny of them. They'd gone into a trust account Martin had set up, the Mack Family Land Trust, that neither Patricia nor Derek knew existed. The 9th document was a current property appraisal, updated 6 months ago at my request. The Birchwood Lane property, the little 2-bedroom house on 2 acres that my children thought was a tired old home occupied by a tired old man, was appraised at $2.7 million. The commercial lease income, the development value, the proximity to the interchange. All of it had turned that modest piece of Tennessee dirt into something none of them had ever imagined. $2.7 million. The 10th document was the trust agreement itself. Donna and I had set it up so that the property, the lease income, and all associated assets were held in the Mack Family Land Trust, with me as the sole living trustee. Not Patricia. Not Derek. Not Craig with his tape measure and his folded arms. Me. Gerald Allen Mack. Bus driver. Route 27. And the 11th document, the one I'd had Martin draft just 3 days ago, the Thursday after the dinner at Hargrove's Grill, was a revised beneficiary designation. I'd removed Patricia and Derek entirely. The trust's new beneficiaries were 3 entities. The Clarksville-Montgomery County School System's Transportation Workers Retirement Fund, a scholarship endowment at Austin Peay State University in Donna's name, and a small bequest to Ruthie, Donna's sister, who had been the only person at that table to show anything resembling shame, even if she hadn't spoken. Martin looked at the documents spread across his desk. He'd seen most of them before, but the revised beneficiary sheet was new. "You're sure about this?" he asked. "Martin, my daughter stood up at my birthday dinner and called me a burden in front of 14 people. My son looked at his phone. They've already hired a lawyer to try to take this property from me. They think I'm a 67-year-old bus driver with nothing. "You are a 67-year-old bus driver," Martin said, "with $2.7 million in assets and a trust they can't touch." "That's right." He nodded, took off his glasses, put them back on. "And the vanishing part?" I'd already told him my plan over the phone Sunday night, after I'd gotten home from Hargrove's Grill and stood in the kitchen where Donna had died. The kitchen that still smelled faintly of the cinnamon candle she'd lit every morning. The kitchen where I'd made a decision not out of anger, but out of a quiet, exhausted clarity that comes when you realize the people you've been carrying don't even know you're holding them. "I'm putting the house in the trust's name officially on Wednesday," I said. "I've already given my notice at the depot. Last day is Friday. Saturday morning, I'm driving to Donna's cousin's cabin in Gatlinburg. I've paid 6 months' rent in advance. I'm not telling Patricia. I'm not telling Derek. I'm not telling anyone. And when Patricia's attorney sends the petition, they'll send it to an address I no longer live at. And when they eventually find Martin Embry, you're going to hand them a copy of the trust documents and let them read the word irrevocable for themselves." Martin almost smiled. He was too professional, but the corner of his mouth moved. "Gerald," he said, "in 31 years of practicing law, I've never had a client who prepared this quietly." 30 years of driving a bus," I said. "You learn how to be patient." I stood up, put the documents back in the lockbox, closed the lid, spun the combination. "Martin, one more thing." "Yes. If they ask you what kind of man I was, tell them the truth. Tell them I drove a bus. Tell them I paid for everything. And tell them I never said a word until the words were the only thing I had left." I walked out of that office with a canvas grocery bag and a lockbox and the quiet satisfaction of a man who had been invisible for so long that no one noticed when he disappeared for real. By Friday, I'd turned in my keys at the depot, said goodbye to Mrs. Delacroix at the crosswalk. She was the only one who cried. Packed the Ranger with 2 suitcases, a box of Donna's photographs, and the navy blue tie. Saturday morning, before the sun came up, I pulled out of the Birchwood Lane driveway for the last time. So I vanished. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps when you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So thank you for real. 14 months later, the Gatlinburg cabin sat on a ridge above the Little Pigeon River, tucked between hemlock trees so tall they blocked the afternoon sun. Donna's cousin, Louise, had owned it since 1998 and hadn't used it in 3 years because of her knees. She'd given me a set of keys and said, "Stay as long as the mountains will have you, Gerald." The mountains, it turned out, were generous. I woke up each morning at 5:45, the same time my alarm had gone off for 30 years, because some rhythms don't leave you, and made coffee in a percolator on the gas stove. I sat on the porch in a wooden rocker that creaked on the left side and watched the mist lift off the valley like a curtain rising on a play I didn't have to perform in. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt deliberate. There's a difference. I started walking. 2 miles a day at first, then 4, then 6. My knees complained for the first month, then stopped. I lost 14 pounds without trying. I let my beard grow, silver, full, the kind of beard Donna would have rubbed with her palm and said, "Now you look like a mountain man, Gerald." The trust income arrived quarterly in an account Martin managed. I didn't need much. My pension from the school system covered groceries and gas. The trust money accumulated. I donated the first quarterly payment, just over $12,000, to the Transportation Workers Fund. Wrote a letter to the superintendent suggesting it be used for vehicle safety upgrades. They sent back a thank you card signed by 11 drivers. I put it on the refrigerator, next to a photograph of Donna standing in the Birchwood Lane backyard in 2003, holding a garden hose, laughing at something I'd said that I can't remember now but wish I could. As for my family, I heard through Ruthie. She was the only one I'd given my new number to, not because she'd earned it at the dinner, but because Donna would have wanted her sister to know I was alive. Patricia and Craig had filed the petition to declare me financially dependent. It landed at Martin's office like a paper airplane hitting a brick wall. Martin responded with a 12-page legal brief outlining the Mack Family Land Trust, the irrevocable beneficiary designations, and a polite but firm suggestion that Patricia's attorney advise his client to withdraw the petition before the court took a closer look at the family's motivations. The petition was withdrawn within 9 days. But the damage had its own schedule. Craig, who had apparently been counting on the Birchwood Lane property as a retirement strategy he never bothered to build for himself, had extended his credit based on what he assumed he'd eventually inherit. When the trust documents made clear that he would inherit nothing, not the property, not the lease income, not a single dollar, his financial situation became what Martin politely called untenable. He and Patricia separated that fall. Ruthie told me Patricia moved back into a one-bedroom apartment in Clarksville and took a job at a dental office answering phones. Derek, to his small credit, tried. He called Ruthie 6 times asking for my number. She asked me if she should give it to him. I thought about it for 3 days. I thought about the community college tuition, the boiled water, the $200 in the birthday card he'd set on the counter next to an energy drink, the phone he'd stared at while his sister called me a burden. Not yet, I told Ruthie. But tell him I'm alive. She did. She said he cried. I don't know what to do with that information. A father wants to believe his son's tears mean something. But a man who's been invisible for 3 years has learned to wait for evidence. The scholarship endowment at Austin P was established in January, 6 months after I'd left. The Donna Mack Memorial Scholarship. Full tuition for a first-generation college student pursuing education or nursing. Donna's 2 passions. The first recipient was a 19-year-old girl from Montgomery County whose mother drove a city bus. When Ruthie told me that, I went out to the porch and sat in the creaking rocker and laughed until I cried. Route 27. Full circle. Mrs. Delacroix sent me a Christmas card that December. Inside, she'd written, "The new driver doesn't wave." I wrote back, "Train him." People ask me, or they would if anyone were around to ask, whether I regret it. Vanishing. Walking away. Leaving 14 people at a table without saying a word. I don't. Not because I'm proud. Not because I'm angry. I passed through anger somewhere around month 3, on a trail above Klingman's Dome, breathing hard, looking at a sky so wide it made everything else feel small, including the grudge I'd been carrying. Anger is heavy. I set it down the way I set down that bread roll. Gently, without fuss. I don't regret it because I learned something that took me 67 years and 30 years behind a steering wheel to understand. You cannot make people see you. You can show up every morning at 6:14. You can make the double payments. You can skip the vacations, boil the water, put the $200 in the card, iron the shirt, wear the tie your dead wife bought you, and sit at the head of a table with your name on a little card. And none of it will matter if the people around that table have already decided your furniture. That's not bitterness. That's arithmetic. Donna knew. She always knew. She saw what the land could become before anyone else did because she paid attention to the things other people drove past without looking. That was her gift. She paid attention. And the cruelest irony of my life is that the woman who paid the most attention to me is the one who left first. And the people who paid the least attention are the ones who stayed and expected me to keep serving. I think about Patricia sometimes. Not with hatred. Not even with sadness, exactly. More like the way you think about a road you used to drive that's been rerouted. Still there. You just don't take it anymore. I think about Derek more often. That's the one that sits in my chest like a stone I can't quite swallow. He was 4 years old when I started driving Route 27. He used to stand at the front door in his pajamas and wave at me when I pulled out of the driveway. Every single morning. Rain, snow, August heat. He waved. And I honked twice, once for hello, once for I love you. He stopped waving when he was 12. I kept honking until he was 18. That's the thing about being a father. You keep honking long after the door is closed. If you're listening to this and you have someone in your life who shows up every day, who drives the same route, pays the same bills, wears the same boots, look at them. Look at them before they become invisible. Look at them before they vanish. Because quiet people don't leave loudly. They leave the way they lived, without making a fuss. And by the time you notice the silence, it's because they've taken it with them. 30 years behind a wheel. Paid for everything. Said nothing. Until the nothing was all I had left to say. This morning, I sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee, the same brand Donna used to buy, Folgers in the red can, nothing fancy, and listened to the river below the ridge. The mist was lifting. A cardinal landed on the railing, looked at me for a long moment, and flew off toward the tree line. I took a sip, set the cup down on the arm of the rocker. The wood creaked once on the left side, and then everything was still. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories.